All right, welcome back, Powers on Sports Podcast. Always great to have this next guest with us. We try to get him a couple of times a year, and this is a perfect time to get him as he is enthralled in the beginning of college football season as well as the NFL. The one and only multi-talented Mr. David Moulton. David is the host of the syndicated radio show Miller and Moulton radio show. He's a Sirius XM host. He's a part of the CBS Saturday 3:30 crew with Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson. And he also is a part of the ESPN Monday Night crew with Troy Aikman and Joe Buck. So welcome in, Mr. Moulton.
I don't know about multi-talented, but I got a lot of W-2 forms. I'll tell you that.
And you got a new location. I just found out that you moved from Southwest Florida. You're now up in North Florida, up in Jacksonville.
Yep. Family reasons. We had to relocate after nearly a quarter century in the 239. So, it's a bigger city is my wife. My wife calls it the big city. I grew up within a half an hour of New York City. I go, honey, Jacksonville is a city, but it's not the big city. Now take it easy.
And you got a new addition to the family. Your daughter just got married over the weekend. Yep. You got a new son-in-law. So congratulations on that.
Yep. And so the family's growing, which is awesome.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're going to make this a football-centric podcast.
All right.
Interview chat with you. We're going to talk some college and NFL. First of all, I know you're going to be in New York this weekend with covering the Jets Bills. What a fun weekend it could potentially be as a sports fan with the U.S. Open Finals. You got Jets and Giants both hosting this weekend, and you're going to be there at some point in the weekend. What a great weekend for New York sports fans.
Well, it's probably asking a lot for 20-year-old American lefty Ben Shelton to make it to the final, since he has to go through arguably the greatest player of all time to get there. But either way, think about this little, 30-hour window. Late Sunday afternoon, you could have number one Alcaraz against number two Djokovic. And obviously they had that classic Wimbledon final and all that, which will lead right into Cowboys Giants Sunday night. And then Monday night Jets Bills on September 11th across the harbor from Lower Manhattan. So yes, it could be magical. And of course, for millions of people in the New York metropolitan area who have Spectrum cable, they won't be able to see it unless something dramatic happens in the next few days. So that in and of itself is remarkable. I have a feeling if I were living in that area, no matter whose side of this dispute I was on, all right, I would have YouTube TV by Saturday.
And also you could have Coco Gauff on Saturday night in the women's final.
Right. Trying to become, the first teenager to win it since Serena back in 2001.
Yeah. Just the changing of the guard there with Coco Gauff. Speaking of the Spectrum deal, obviously, if you don't know, fans, Spectrum's having a major issue with Disney. So no ESPN issue. They're having ESPN, no ESPN games, no ABC games are being shown on Spectrum. Is this a situation where Roger Goodell would make a phone call to somebody this week to say, "Hey guys, figure it out," or is he thinking we've got YouTube? God bless you. Hope they all come to YouTube.
No, he can't, because it's really, if you're Goodell, you figure, well, people go to the sports bars, people will find our product. Okay, let this be a Disney Spectrum dispute. What's interesting is there are other places you could go. I mean, who's the bigger loser here? Is it the four-letter network or is it Spectrum? Spectrum has all but said out loud, well, we don't make our money off of cable.
Right.
We make our money doing other things. And besides, those guys have announced in the next 2 to 3 years, they're going to circumvent us and go direct to consumer anyway. So why should we continue to pay for them? So this to me is interesting in this sense. Yeah, people will probably work around this dispute in the areas where they're affected. But will Spectrum be the first major cable carrier to cut the cord from ESPN?
Right.
Never mind the customer cutting the cord from them.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point, because where I'm at, Spectrum is the number one cable provider here in Tampa. I mean, Spectrum and Frontier, but Spectrum's clearly number one. And I don't look. Fortunately, for me, I don't have Spectrum anymore. I'm a YouTube guy now, so it doesn't affect me. But there's lots of people around me that are affected by this, and will
Yes.
continue to be.
And think about it also this weekend. It means you won't see Alabama, Texas in
Yeah,
college football. You won't see the U.S. Open. As you talked about, it could be the biggest weekend of American tennis in 20 years.
Yeah.
And then obviously Sunday night football, although you should be able to get that with Spectrum since it's on NBC.
Right.
And then, but Monday Night Football, Jets, Bills, which just a few people are interested in. Jason, I don't know if you're aware, but the Jets are getting a lot of hype.
A lot of F-bombs coming out of Robert Saleh's mouth and a lot of attention.
Well, and honestly, I mean, especially with ESPN having them for Monday Night Football, but with all the hype they're getting on the four-letter network, I mean, they're rivaling LeBron, Lakers, and Cowboys talk.
Yes,
They're getting so much hype.
That's right. All right, let's talk about let's jump to the college side first.
Okay.
Obviously, where you lived in Southwest Florida for many, many years. Talk about what do you think the phenomenon of Deion taking over at Colorado with those roots in South Florida and all that stuff. Just give me a thought on Deion and what happened in Dallas or Fort Worth last Saturday.
Well, two things that I need to admit right out in the open. I am a huge Deion guy. So you could take this with a grain of salt if you're not a huge Deion fan. I am. Loved him as a player. All right. And I am into Coach Prime. I am. I also like people who are willing to be original and do things their way and say, yeah, I know what conventional wisdom is or the conventional way of doing things. And I really don't care. This is what works for me. And I'm telling you, it's going to work. And so he's doing it. And for 1 week anyway, it worked with 86 new players. I mean, this is stunning. 86 new players, and they were the team that didn't have procedure penalties. Exactly. They were the poised team, came from behind on the road and won against obviously a pretty darn good program. They were nationally ranked. They played for the national title last year. I mean, it's remarkable. His kid can obviously play quarterback, and Hunter, the wide receiver DB, as Deion said, he's a first-round pick. He should be one of the top 5 picks in the draft in a couple of years.
For sure.
I mean, he's elite, but that's only 2 of the 86 new players. And so I hope Deion works. I didn't think it would this year. Right. They had a difficult schedule, and the Pac-12 is actually very deep. Very deep. It's clearly one of the 3 best conferences in the country this year, ironically, the last year of the conference. And I thought that their over-under is 3.5, Jason, and I took the under.
Yeah.
And obviously it looks like I'm going to be wrong because they could start out 3-0 because they got Nebraska at home, which are now a 5-point favorite, I guess, against, and then they got Colorado State. So they could be 3-0 for goodness sake.
Can you imagine if it's Colorado, USC in week 4, both undefeated in Boulder? The hype behind that game?
Well, and game day would normally be there, except that Saturday night, there's Ohio State visiting Notre Dame.
Right.
Okay, but yes, and Iowa's at Penn State. I mean, that'll be our first really big Saturday of the college season on the 23rd, but we got to get there first.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think that could, I mean, obviously they play Oregon and then USC, but man, if they were to get to USC undefeated, woo, there would be some TV eyes watching that game. Talk about, we mentioned the Pac-12 resurgence, obviously in the last year. How good is it for the sport of college football that the Florida State, Texas, Penn State are all back in the national title chatter, and you got some West Coast teams in the mix as well?
Well, first off, the fact that Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all seem to be at the top of their game at the same time, that has never happened.
Right.
Okay. You could argue it did for a moment in the mid-90s when Joe Pa and the Nittany Lions just joined the conference. Okay, maybe they were both at the top of their games at that exact moment, but it really has not happened in the 25 years since. You know, one of them was always lacking, whether it was Michigan, whether it was Penn State, because Ohio State's been at a pretty high level here for over 20 years. But now, I mean, come on. 3 of them in the top 6, 7, 8, depending on which poll that and they all have 2 of the 3 have terrific quarterbacks. They're all experienced. I mean, this could be Franklin's best team, and yet they're picked to finish 3rd in their division. That's how loaded that is. And it'll be great if Texas can truly be Texas again because of where they're going. I mean, to add another heavyweight to the SEC. But Jason, outside of Coach Prime, my favorite story of week one was Florida State looked like Florida State. I mean, last year they beat LSU, but they didn't look like they did.
Yep.
They didn't look like they did this first weekend. I mean, as I like to say, they've got dudes. They got dudes.
In the trenches.
Yes. And they got dudes on the defensive line making plays in which you and I are old enough to remember that's how Florida State looked.
Yep.
That was the 80s. That was the 90s. Mickey Andrews watched that game Sunday night and went, I've seen us play like that.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. And it's been a while. Even the 2013 team that won the national title was driven by offense. And this team has a prolific offense. But I saw some things defensively in which I go, oh, it's been a generation since I saw Florida State have some dudes on that side of the ball. And this is a very dangerous team. Very dangerous. Okay. And they've got depth. Norville's hit it out of the park in the transfer portal.
Yes, sir.
And I think you're seeing it. Dabo Swinney at Clemson has yet to he took one transfer GA kid to help him really further his career into coaching. But Dabo's avoided the transfer portal entirely, and Norvell took a down and out program and rebuilt it to a top 5 program largely through the portal, and you're seeing the difference.
And 2 years ago, what was everybody at Florida State saying? Should we hire Deion Sanders?
Jason, 2 years ago this week, they were coming off a 3-6 pandemic season. They lost their opener, and they were about to host Jacksonville State and lose.
Yes.
On the last play of the game. So Norville was 3-8, 11 games into his coaching career. That was 2 years ago this week. Look at where they are now.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. Talk about your ventures with CBS. Obviously, this is the last year of exclusively SEC, but you're going to be mixing in some Big Ten, and obviously next year you guys will be going in Big Ten. How is that? Just the philosophy of that? How is that taking hold with, I guess, you, Brad, and Gary, and just your production crew?
Well, listen, we take a lot of pride. We think that we've done a good job televising the games. Steve Moulton, who directs college football on CBS, he directs the Masters. I mean, Craig Silver is an award-winning producer, March Madness, college football for 30 years. We think the product is a good product. So it doesn't change to us whether we're doing the Sun Bowl or whether we're doing Alabama LSU. It really doesn't. But there's no doubt. I mean, the SEC is unique. I mean, it just means more. It does. Throughout the conference, it does. Even in the Big Ten, it means an awful lot at a lot of places, but it means an awful lot at more places in the SEC when it comes to football. It just does. And so that will always be a unique arrangement. I think both sides have been good for each other. Jason, when you say that what I'm about to say out loud, if you're not old enough, you think I'm a moron for what I'm about to say. But when CBS in the mid-90s made the decision to give the SEC its own window and broadcast it coast to coast, the reaction nationally was, this is a joke. First off, the SEC, who the hell cares about SEC football?
Outside of Jefferson Pilot.
Yeah, outside of Alabama and Tennessee, who the hell cares about what are you guys doing? Okay, and CBS said, no, actually, it's good football. It's got a lot of tradition, and no, we think it's worthy of its own time slot. And it took a while. I'll give you an example. 2003, LSU wins the national title with Nick Saban. There was a game in mid-November that year. LSU at Eli and Ole Miss his senior year, and it was for the SEC West regular season championship. And it was clearly the biggest game in the country. ESPN and Game Day wouldn't go to it. You know why? Because it was LSU and Ole Miss, and they're like, nah, nobody really cares. Then the next year, LSU goes on to win the national title. The next year, Auburn goes undefeated and can't get in the playoff. Why? Because USC and Oklahoma were ranked 1 and 2 at the beginning of the year. They both were undefeated, and Auburn was never given serious consideration. I mean, it was not that long. It was a generation ago where the SEC was considered, yeah, you're a Power 5 conference in name, but I mean, come on, you're the SEC. It's football. You're a basketball conference, and so now, obviously, it's
and
huge.
CBS was the first didn't they give the SEC a 20-year contract, like a 20-year TV deal, or
and then negotiated it when A&M and Missouri came in and extended it some more. You're right. Now, it turned out to be an amazing deal for CBS. CBS has been broadcasting the last 10 years of SEC football and only paying about $55 million a year to do it. I mean, it turned into one of the great. Mike Oresco, by the way, negotiated that deal, and he's running the American. Mike Oresco and Tony Petitti helped negotiate that deal. Who's now the commissioner of the Big Ten? Ironically, how that worked out.
Talk to the audience about the rhythm of a broadcast of a college game versus an NFL game. I'm always curious to know, from a production side of things, just the rhythm of the game, whether it's you working with Gary and Brad versus working with Troy and Joe, just the rhythm of a college game versus an NFL game.
An NFL game has more of a rhythm, Jason, in which, there's very little no huddle in the middle of the game. There's no huddle late in the first half when obviously a team is pressed for time and they need to move quickly. And there might be some no huddle mid fourth quarter, teams trailing by 2 or more scores. They need to pick up the pace. But for the most part, the NFL has a rhythm. It's like a golfing foursome in which they all play at relatively the same pace. The play happens. You show people getting up, walking back to the huddle, and then you queue up 2 or 3 replays from different angles. And then what do? You see them break the huddle and go to the line of scrimmage. College football is much more frenetic. A lot of coaches doing things very differently. Also, you have twice as many players on the sidelines.
Right.
It is a lot tougher. Now, the NFL made it tougher more recently when they allowed guys to wear different numbers. But I mean, an NFL game is really easy from a broadcasting standpoint to do in this sense. There's only 46, 47 guys active.
You know who they are right off the bat.
And just about everybody if you're paying attention to the league.
Yep.
You got 100 guys on a college sideline. You've got not only duplicate numbers, as we saw in the Florida-Utah game. Wow. Jason, we've had triplicate numbers with some teams. Okay, and they're all listed as a 6'2", 195-pound corner. So how could you tell which one's which? Because they don't have names on the back of their jerseys. I mean, so college is, I believe, harder to do than the NFL. Also, the NFL is actually much more giving of information. It's mandated. 90 minutes before the game, you are told who's active, who's not. Right. They give you much more information. Colleges think it's the Cold War. And it's actually a little beef of mine because, it hurts the network broadcasting the games, but it also hurts you, the fan. I mean, I have gotten into it with some college people going, you do know the Dallas Cowboys tell me what's what 90 minutes before kickoff. I mean, do you think you're bigger than them? Okay, right. You really can tell us whether or not so-and-so is going to play.
Right.
You do know we don't go on the air till kickoff, right? Okay. I mean, who are we going to tell?
Right.
Right. So, so that's the difference. As for a booth, Jason, like, for example, I write stuff down on Saturdays for Gary Danielson on a card, and I hand it to him. I started doing that with Troy Aikman on what was then Thursdays and Sundays and now is Mondays. And after about a year and a half of that, Troy said, I want you to talk to me instead. And so I put on one of these and hit the button. And so now you have to wait because Troy's got people in his ear and he has to be able to hear Joe. And then if the producer's talking to him, what have you. But I wait because I hear in my ear what he hears in his ear. And when no one's talking to him, okay, or Joe's talking about something that Troy doesn't necessarily have to hear because Joe's, just giving a few facts, I can then jump in for 3 seconds and say, hey, be aware of this, or, and the one thing that there's a lot of things actually, Jason, that you guys see at home that we can miss in the booth because the camera takes you intimately to everything that's happening. Well, when you're up in a booth, you're watching the whole field.
Right.
Okay. And so that's why I know you're sitting on your couch and you go, how the heck can those morons miss that? Okay. Well, believe it or not, our view is actually not as good as your view sometimes. Sometimes. So there's a lot that goes into a game. Um, it's I had done live local television for 20 years. The first time I ever was a part of a network football broadcast. And I figured, well, I understand television. Jason, I stood for a half an hour at the first game I ever worked at next to Gary with my mouth agape, unable to speak. It was like, I guess, landing planes. It was moving so quickly. I was like, how when players go from college to pro and they talk about the difference in speed, here I was 20 years, a quote, veteran of television and had been a part of live broadcast, had done the games. And I was like, I've never experienced anything like this before. So I do wish every fan could get that experience once to understand and have more of appreciation of just what goes into but also I think they would understand, oh, okay, that's how this mistake could happen. That's how I could see something on the couch that they can't see in the booth. Got it. They're not as big of morons as I thought.
And the other part of this too is I've had the fortune to be do a couple times, being in the truck on the production side with the graphics and all the producer and the director barking out orders and camera angles, and some salty language gets said when stuff gets done wrong and all that kind of stuff too.
Well, and let's face it, as a fan, we view the broadcast kind of like the way baseball players view umpiring. Okay. Hey, we appreciate you. You need to be perfect. Okay. And as a fan, if the broadcast makes a mistake or the broadcaster makes a mistake, you are like, come on, what the heck? Okay. Well, there's only about 1,000 opportunities to make a mistake. I mean, that's all. And if you go 998 and 2, then there's this thing called X and people harp on the 2. So.
All right, we listen to David Moulton, Sirius XM host, works with CBS on Saturday afternoons, Monday Night Football on ESPN with the fellas. Going to be in New York City this weekend for Jets Buffalo on Monday Night Football. Talk about just being in New York on 9/11 weekend, kind of the emotional. I know you're a New York guy. Talk about that emotion of it. You can have Jets, you can have the Giants Sunday night, then the Jets on Monday night.
Yeah, I lost a college friend on September 11th. And obviously, I grew up, I could darn near see the towers from where I lived. And I know it's been 22 years, but at some point, flying in Sunday morning on the 10th, usually when you fly in, they used to be on your left. And I will cry at some point during my 48 hours back home, if you will. There's no doubt about it. I don't know if people, though, watching will want the broadcast, besides mentioning the obvious that it's September 11th. I don't really think they want us going there. We all of a certain age know where we were and have our thoughts. And but yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. It will be a remarkable 36-hour, potentially 48-hour window in that part of our country where it could be the absolute height of sports. And then obviously also it's the remembrance.
Yeah, right.
Right. I'm also curious. I mean, Jason, I don't know what you think, but to me, like Gannett, who owns USA Today and about 400 other papers, they did their NFL predictions a couple of weeks ago. They predicted 10 AFC teams to win 10 or more games.
We're getting to that in a second, but yeah.
And that means that 3 teams in the AFC would win 10 or more games and miss the playoffs. They actually had an 11-win team miss the playoffs in the AFC, which hasn't happened since the Patriots in 2008. I mean, but if you think about it, there are a lot of teams in the AFC that we either think are good or are this close to being good. I mean, we think there's 3 teams in the East. We think there's definitely 3, maybe 4 in the North.
Yep.
We think there's 1 in the South, and we think there's at least 2 with Sean Payton, Russell Wilson, and Denver looming in the West. Well, do the math. That gets you to 10, 11 pretty quickly.
I had 11 or 12 that you could legitimately make an argument that could if things go right could make the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 4 teams that I think we look at right now in the entire conference. Probably the Patriots, the Raiders, the Colts, and the Texans. And we go, now, if they made the playoffs, that would shock me. But any of the other 12?
Yeah.
Hell no.
Have you ever seen a year where the power of one conference is so much more distinct than the other conference?
I think so. I think, but then again, I'm 57, so I'm old enough to remember, the NFC kind of had it on the AFC in the 80s. In the 70s, the AFC was a little stronger. They always had like one more team than the NFC. You basically had Dallas and Minnesota in the NFC, and the Rams and the then Redskins were kind of on the periphery. Meanwhile, the 70s in the AFC, you had the Steelers, Dolphins, and Raiders. I mean, they were seemingly great every year. Right. So the AFC kind of had the edge in the 70s. But, man, in the 80s, I mean, the NFC just kicked the tar out of the AFC in the Super Bowl. And they didn't beat them. They beat them like a drum. Right. In the Super Bowl, outside of the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders won 2 Super Bowls, and otherwise the NFC owned the decade. Into the mid-90s even. So I think, Jason, we're at a point right now. Remember how we've gone through this in the NBA where one side's so much stronger than the other? When the Lakers in
the West Magic, was dominant. Yeah.
Right. Well, lately, but you go back 40 years ago, it seemed like the East was a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Lakers with Magic and company just cruised through the West.
Yeah.
So right now, the AFC, like you said, we think there are a double-digit number of good teams in the AFC, and I think we struggle to come up with more than 5 in the NFC.
Right. And as you and I both know, invariably there'll be a team that comes out of nowhere that makes the playoffs that we're thinking, where did they? I mean, we thought they were 2 years away, and they're ready to win today.
Well, look at Seattle last year. I mean, come on. Who had Seattle finishing where they did? Also, really, a year ago at this time, the Eagles were coming off a 9-8 season.
Oh, yeah.
And they snuck in as the 7th seed and got destroyed by Brady and the Bucks in the first round of the playoffs.
Yep.
Now, they made a nice trade with A.J. Brown, had a good draft, but all of a sudden, Jalen Hurts goes from a developing quarterback to a standout quarterback.
Yep.
And I think, by the way, that could happen with a team in the AFC this year, where he goes from developing to stand out. And if it happens in Jacksonville, look out.
Right. Where you're at, that's it, man.
Look out.
So give me a team or two that you think's under the radar. I know it sounds like Jacksonville. We all think they're going to win that division, but can they elevate to be a 1 or 2 seed in the AFC?
Right. Well, people forget, in 2021, you know who the 1 seed was in the AFC playoffs? It was not KC. Who is the Tennessee Titans, correct. And Jacksonville has a similar setup this year. They play in a very winnable division. Yep. They should go, no worse than 5-1 in those division games?
4-2 is the absolute worst.
Well, if they go 4-2, they've really screwed it up.
Right.
Okay. They play 4 first-place teams. Everybody does. Listen to it. They get the Niners, the Chiefs, and the Bengals all at home.
Yep.
The Buffalo game's in London, which is Jacksonville's home away from home. So think about it. You get arguably the easiest schedule from a division standpoint, and you play 4 first-place teams, none of them on the road. So
and you get the rest of the NFC South.
Correct. Which of all the divisions that you could pick as your crossover, which one would you pick in the NFC?
Right.
And so I'm picking the Jacksonville Jaguars to be the 1 seed in the AFC. I think they're going 12-5. They will have beaten, say, Kansas City week 2. Will Kelsey be playing? They get Cincinnati at home in December, where all of a sudden, like Tennessee won the tiebreaker 2 years ago, why they'd beaten Kansas City and Buffalo at home in the regular season. Now they screwed it up in the playoffs, but hey, and to me, I think Jacksonville's going to host the AFC Championship game. I really do. I don't think they're the best team in the AFC. They may be the 3rd or 4th best team in the AFC, but I just think it's going to line up where they host the AFC Championship game. My other team that I don't think anybody's as fond of them as I am this year, I'm really high on the Steelers.
Okay.
2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs. Their offensive line deep enough they could trade 2 linemen to get down to the 53-man cut line. And I think Kenny Pickett can play. He does, and he doesn't have to be a star. Plus, the Steelers defense, top 5 in the league. No one outside of the Eagles last year could get pressure on a passer the way the Steelers can. And if Watt's healthy, they'll have at least 50 sacks this year. I'm high on the Steelers.
And that's another division. That's a bloodbath division. You can make an argument for, I mean, probably not Pittsburgh to maybe win the division, but everybody's a playoff contender in that division. And it's just going to be a bloodbath in that AFC North.
And I do think the Saints win the woe-begone South. I do. I think it comes down to final game of the year, Atlanta at New Orleans. I think the Saints win it. They'll go 10-7. They'll win the division.
Give me a team that everybody thinks is going to be really good that you say, man, I just don't see it. And I think they're going to take a big step back.
I have to admit, I'm struggling with this one because, I mean, can the big 3 in the AFC remain the big 3? With all these good teams challenging them, doesn't one of Buffalo, Cincy, or Kansas City have to come back to the pack this year? So if so, I'll turn it around on you. If I were to tell you one of those 3 is going to be dragged back down to earth this year, which one of the 3 do you think's most vulnerable?
I'm going to, it's going to sound crazy that I'm going to say this. I'm going to say Kansas City because they've not had a year where they've been beset by injury. We got the Kelsey situation. Mahomes has really never missed significant time. I think Kansas City's the team that if injuries are due to happen at some point, Kansas City's the team that's going to take the slide back.
Sorry about that. I lost as soon as you
you're
said
okay.
that.
I'm going to say Kansas City, injuries, Kelsey. They've never really been beset by it. You got the Chris Jones holdout situation. I think KC and nobody wants anybody to get hurt, but Mahomes has really never been hurt where he's ever, been out 5 or 6, 7 weeks. I think that's a team, and their defense ain't great without Chris Jones.
No, it is not. And they got all the little breaks last year. I'm with you, actually. I think the Chiefs Patrick Mahomes will make the playoffs, but he will have to go on the road for the first time in his career. Think about it. 5 years. They've hosted the AFC Championship game 5 years in a row. He's yet to have to play a road playoff game.
And I think Kellen Moore in Los Angeles with Herbert's going to help Herbert.
It's funny. I like the Dolphins week 1 in LA. I think it's a tiebreaker
long term, maybe not week 1, long term. I think it's going to help him.
Well, okay. But, Jason, that week 1 game could be a tiebreaker game.
You're right.
For a playoff spot. I mean, that's how close the AFC is. I'll tell you what, Jason, the team that I'm worried about, even if he stays healthy, like the Ravens have fallen off the last 2 years because Lamar has gotten hurt.
Right.
I think there are more weaknesses with this Ravens team than there has been in past years. They don't have a pass rush. I don't like their corners. And I'll be curious about Lamar in this offense. I'm a big Lamar guy, but this is a radical change, I believe, offensively. And will it take hold right away?
Right. That's a great point. A guy you've covered a lot, Monken at Georgia, the last couple of years.
I think he's a tremendous play caller. But will it take hold right away? I mean, Jason, this to me is a year in which if you're an AFC team, you can't blow games. The margin is going to be so small between like a 3 seed and a 9 seed that, your kicker has to make those last second kicks. You've got to stay healthy. When the schedule maker gives you a win, you have to get it. Yes.
No doubt. No doubt. All right, Dave, David, tell everybody where you're going to be the next couple of weeks, college-wise in the NFL, and where they can find all your great work with Miller and Moulton.
Miller and Moulton, by the way, 4 markets, hopefully growing, waiting on some news here soon.
Good.
All along the west coast of Florida, Lake City, Tampa, St. Pete, Port Charlotte, and Venice, and Fort Myers, Naples. Go to floridasportsnetwork.com to catch us. But SEC travels in 2 weekends. We'll be in Georgia for South Carolina Georgia, but we'll do a couple of Big Ten games in around it. We're in the Big House this Saturday, and we'll be in Happy Valley on a Saturday night, Iowa and Penn State. And Monday Night Football, we're in the Eastern time zone for the first 4 weeks. We go Jersey.
Here in week 3 in Tampa. There you
Jersey,
go.
Pittsburgh, Tampa. Absolutely. So the travel's pretty easy to start for me, Jason.
There you go. That a boy. All right, last question to get you out of here. Jim Harbaugh question. To me, it's a joke that the NCAA, if you're going to suspend Harbaugh, whatever your opinion is on whether he should be suspended or not, you can't let him coach during the week and then sit out on Saturdays, in my view. Either suspend him for the whole week or don't suspend him.
Well, remember, this is an NCAA suspension.
Right.
It's a Michigan suspension.
Right.
I mean, Michigan's hoping that this is going to count with the NCAA when they ultimately decide next year. Right. I would be like you if I'm the NCAA. I'd be like, well, first off, you were favored by 30 or more points in all 3 games you suspended them for. I mean, really? You think this suspension has any meat? And secondly, you let him coach all week and then he gets to watch the game on Saturday? Right.
That's a joke.
I mean, yeah. So, but by the same token, Jason, if I were Michigan, I wouldn't have suspended him at all. I would fight this to the end. Jason, listen, they had FBI video of college basketball coaches, okay, doing illegal things.
Right.
And most everyone on video, okay, nothing has happened to them from an NCAA standpoint.
Will Wade, LSU, by the way.
That's about it, by the way. The only guy who lost his job, by the way, he didn't lose it for the NCAA. LSU 2 years later took his job away from him. If I was Michigan, I would fight this to the end and say to the NCAA, you guys are event planners now, right? That's basically what you've been reduced to. You're event planners. Leave the sports up to us and just cash the checks.
No, you're right. You're right. All right, you can find David Moulton on the David Moulton on X, Twitter, or wherever the hell we're calling it these days. Keep up the great work. Enjoy your weekend with Gary and Brad, and then Troy and Joe. And I know you're gonna have a fun, great year, and pile up those frequent flyer miles, baby.
You got that right. My mom and my aunt flew first class to the wedding this past weekend. Absolutely. Those miles.
Congratulations on that. And I really appreciate the time. We'll definitely catch up with you maybe down the road later in the football season.
You bet, Jason.
Thanks.